Kale walked slowly through the rocky wasteland, his small feet crunching on loose stones. The wind was cold, carrying the smell of dry earth and distant fires. His village had warned him many times not to wander this far. They said the dragon cubs lived here, fierce creatures that trusted no one. Everyone spoke of them with fear. But Kale was not afraid. He was curious. He wanted to see them for himself. The wasteland stretched endlessly, with jagged cliffs rising like ancient giants. Kale clutched his satchel tightly, filled with a few scraps of food and a water flask. He had been walking for hours, guided only by the soft sounds of whimpering he thought he heard. Sometimes it sounded like the wind. Sometimes it sounded like a small cry. Kale followed the sound carefully, stepping over rocks and avoiding deep cracks in the ground. As he climbed a narrow ridge, he saw a small hollow in the rocks below. Inside, a nest made of dry twigs and soft moss rested safely in a shallow cave. Tiny figures moved within it. Kale's heart skipped a beat. He had found them, the dragon cubs. Their scales shimmered faintly in the dim sunlight. Their eyes glowed like tiny fires. They watched him carefully, heads tilting, mouths opening slightly as if to hiss, but they stayed still. Kale froze, unsure if he should move closer. He remembered the warnings from the village elders. Never go near them, they had said. They trust no human. One wrong step and they will attack. But looking at the cubs, Kale felt no fear. There was something in their eyes that seemed lonely, almost curious. Slowly, he knelt on a flat rock a few meters away from the nest. He spoke softly, his voice trembling a little. "Hello. I am Kale. I don't want to hurt you." The cubs shifted slightly but did not run. One of them, smaller than the rest, stepped forward cautiously. Its scales were a soft green, and its eyes were round and bright. Kale smiled gently. "I have no food, no weapon. I just want to be your friend." He reached out a hand, but not too close, just enough to show he meant no harm. The cub blinked, uncertain, and then looked back at its siblings. They huddled together, whispering low sounds that Kale could not understand, yet he felt they were speaking to each other about him. Kale stayed still for a long time. The wind howled around the cliffs, but the hollow felt quiet, almost safe. Slowly the cubs began to move. One of the larger ones crawled closer, sniffing the air. Kale kept his hand low, letting the cub come to him if it wanted. A small breeze blew through the hollow, carrying the scent of moss and earth. Kale realized he was holding his breath. He didn't want to scare them. Minutes passed like hours. The cub sniffed his hand and then quickly pulled back, shaking its head. Kale laughed softly. "I know, you don't trust me yet. That's okay. I'll wait." He stayed there, speaking softly, telling them about the village, about the warm sun on the fields, about the stories his grandmother used to tell. The cubs listened, tilting their heads. They did not move closer, but they did not retreat either. As the sun began to set, Kale felt tired. He knew he could not stay too long in the wasteland. The cliffs were dangerous in the dark. He decided to rest nearby, just out of reach of the nest. Curling up on a flat stone, he kept his eyes on the cubs. Slowly, exhaustion took over and he drifted into a light sleep. The cubs watched him silently, their small bodies coiled together. One brave cub crawled closer, resting a tiny head near Kale's shoulder, just to feel his warmth. The night grew colder and Kale shivered in his sleep. Yet he felt no fear, only a strange comfort. The cubs, for the first time, seemed to accept the human presence. They had never allowed anyone so close before. Kale's soft breathing and gentle voice, even in dreams, seemed to calm them. They stayed near him, protecting him in their own small, cautious way. By the first light of morning, Kale awoke to find the cubs still around him. They watched him silently, no longer just curious but not yet friendly. Kale smiled, feeling a connection he had never felt before with any creature. He knew this was only the beginning. The cubs had not fully trusted him yet, but he had taken the first step. A human had entered their world without fear, without harm, and for the first time the dragon cubs had not driven him away. Kale stood carefully, brushing dust from his clothes. He spoke softly to the cubs again. "I will come back. I promise." The cubs made a low sound, almost like a reply. Kale smiled and turned back toward the path leading to the village. He looked over his shoulder once more. The cubs watched him, and for the first time they did not hiss or growl. Something had changed in the wasteland that day. A human had walked among dragon cubs, not as a threat but as a friend. And for the first time the cubs had felt something they had never felt before: trust. Kale hurried back to the wasteland the next evening, carrying a small bag with water and some soft berries he had picked from the village outskirts. His heart raced with excitement and a little nervousness. He did not know if the dragon cubs would remember him, or if they would react with fear and anger. The stories of the villagers echoed in his mind, warning him that no human had ever entered the dragon nest and returned safely. Yet Kale felt a strange courage. He wanted to see them again to try to be their friend. As he approached the hollow, the first thing he noticed was silence. The cubs were there, curled up in their nest, their small bodies glowing faintly in the last light of the day. Kale froze, unsure if he should call out or stay quiet. Slowly he stepped closer and whispered, "Hello, it's me, Kale." His voice was soft, careful, like a gentle breeze. One of the cubs lifted its head and blinked at him. It was the small green cub he had seen the day before. The others stirred slightly, huddling together. Kale put the bag down a little way from the nest. He did not want to frighten them with sudden movements. Then he sat on a flat rock, keeping his distance but close enough to be seen. "I brought some food," he said quietly. "I thought you might like it." He opened the bag and showed the berries and water. The cubs watched him carefully, tilting their heads. They did not move closer, but they did not run either. Kale smiled. He knew that trust would take time. As the sun dipped lower, Kale decided to rest nearby. He knew the wasteland could be dangerous in the dark, but he did not want to leave yet. He settled on the stone, keeping his eyes on the cubs. The small green cub crept closer, just a little, sniffing the air around him. Kale spoke softly to it, telling stories of the village, of the warm sunlight on the fields, and of the soft grass where he played with other children. The cub listened, its tiny head tilting, its eyes wide and curious. Night came quickly. The sky turned deep blue, and stars began to shine like scattered jewels. Kale's eyelids grew heavy. He yawned and curled up on the rock, careful not to move too suddenly. The cubs watched him silently. One by one they inched closer, until the small green cub rested its head on Kale's shoulder. Kale felt its tiny warmth and smiled in his sleep. He had never felt so calm among wild creatures before. The wind rose, whistling softly through the cliffs, but the hollow seemed protected. The cubs shifted around him, not threatening, only curious and watchful. Kale dreamed lightly, imagining the cubs playing in the sunlight, running and chasing one another across the cliffs. The small cub on his shoulder twitched its tail gently, almost as if it were responding to his dreams. Hours passed. Kale stirred, waking slightly when he felt the cub move closer. He opened his eyes slowly and saw all the cubs near him. They were awake, their eyes bright in the dim moonlight. None of them growled or hissed. They only watched him, silently and carefully. Kale spoke in a whisper, "I won't hurt you. I just want to stay with you a little while." One of the larger cubs stepped forward cautiously, sniffing the air around him. Kale held very still. Morning came with soft golden light spilling into the hollow. Kale woke fully and saw the cubs still close by. They had not run away in the night. Instead, they had stayed near him, watching, learning, and feeling safe in his presence. Kale laughed softly, brushing a bit of dust from his clothes. "Good morning," he said. "I stayed all night, just like I promised I would come back." The cubs tilted their heads as if they understood. One made a soft chirping sound, almost like a greeting. Kale stood carefully, not wanting to scare them. He stretched his arms and yawned. "I'll stay longer today," he said. "I want to play with you, to be your friend." Slowly he approached the nest, keeping his movements gentle. The cubs watched, and then for the first time, one of them touched his hand with a small, clawless paw. Kale smiled widely. It was a small gesture, but to him it meant everything. The dragon cubs were beginning to trust him. They spent the morning together. Kale told them stories, pointed out the cliffs and rocks, and made up games for them to play. The cubs started moving closer, nudging his arms, brushing against his legs. Their scales felt smooth and warm, and Kale laughed at their playful antics. He realized that trust was not instant. It had to be earned, slowly, with patience and kindness. But the cubs had begun to accept him. As the sun rose higher, Kale knew he had made a real connection. The cubs were no longer just wild creatures that could strike at any moment. They had allowed a human to be near them, to sleep among them, and to speak gently without harm. Kale felt proud not just for himself but for the new bond he had created. A human and dragon cubs, together in the wasteland, had taken the first step toward something extraordinary. Kale promised himself he would return every day, bringing small gifts and spending time with them. He waved to the cubs as he prepared to leave for a short while, and one of the cubs made a tiny sound like a farewell. Kale smiled. This was just the beginning of a friendship that would change both his life and the lives of the dragon cubs forever. Kale returned to the wasteland the following day with a small satchel filled with food and a few simple toys he had made from scraps. His heart beat fast with excitement. He wondered if the dragon cubs would remember him, or if they would run away at the sight of a human. But Kale had learned patience and he knew that trust could not be rushed. He walked carefully, keeping his movements slow and gentle so as not to frighten them. The hollow appeared before him, tucked safely among the cliffs. The cubs were there, huddled together in their nest, blinking up at him with curious eyes. The sun's light highlighted the shimmer of their scales, green, bronze, and silver, catching it like tiny mirrors. Kale froze for a moment, simply watching them. His heart filled with wonder. They were more beautiful and more alive than he had imagined. Kale sat down at a distance, leaving the satchel beside him. He did not want to intrude, only to offer what he had brought. "I have food," he whispered softly. "And some little toys. You don't have to touch them if you don't want." One of the cubs lifted its head cautiously, sniffing the air. The others watched him silently, ears and tails twitching. Kale smiled and waited patiently, remembering how he had won their trust the night before. Slowly, the green cub, the smallest and bravest of the group, crept closer. Kale held his breath, remaining still. The cub sniffed at the food, then backed away. Kale chuckled softly. "That's okay," he said gently. "I don't mind. You can try them when you're ready." He began telling them stories about the village, about the sun warming the fields, about the laughter of children playing. His voice was calm and soothing, and the cubs listened, their glowing eyes fixed on him. Time passed quietly. Kale offered small bites of berries to the cubs, placing them carefully on the rocks nearby. At first, the cubs only watched, uncertain. But curiosity slowly overcame caution. One by one, they approached the food, tasting it carefully with tiny nibbles. Kale clapped softly and laughed. "See? I told you it's good." The cubs looked up at him as if acknowledging his words. They began to circle him cautiously, sniffing his hands and arms. Kale let them, careful to make no sudden movements. As the day wore on, Kale began to play with them. He rolled a small ball made from cloth scraps toward them. At first, the cubs hesitated, unsure what it was. Then the green cub pawed at it, sending it tumbling across the rocks. Another cub joined in, and soon they were nudging the ball back and forth, chasing it and tumbling over one another in clumsy delight. Kale laughed, a warm, happy sound that echoed across the cliffs. The cubs chirped and squeaked in response, clearly enjoying themselves. By afternoon, Kale felt the bond between them growing stronger. He noticed that each cub had its own personality. The green cub was brave and curious, always the first to explore. A bronze cub was cautious, staying close to the nest but watching carefully. A silver cub was playful, rolling on its back and chasing shadows. Kale learned to recognize their little quirks and names in his own mind. He spoke to each one as if they could understand every word. As the sun began to set, Kale realized he had been with the cubs for hours. He sat quietly, letting them rest around him. The green cub curled beside him, nudging his hand gently. The others settled close to one another, their tails brushing softly against his legs. Kale whispered, "You trust me now, don't you?" The cubs blinked slowly as if answering him in their own way. He smiled and closed his eyes for a moment, feeling warmth and peace he had never known before. Night fell and Kale stayed with them, careful not to move too much. The wind whistled gently through the cliffs, but the hollow felt safe and protected. The cubs had learned to follow his calm presence. One by one they rested closer to him than ever before. Kale felt their small, warm bodies pressed against him, and he realized that this was more than friendship. This was a bond built on trust, patience, and understanding. Kale spoke softly in the dark, telling stories about stars and distant lands he had never visited. The cubs listened, their eyes half closed, breathing steadily. The small green cub rested its head on his arm, and Kale smiled in the dim light. For the first time he felt like he truly belonged in the wasteland, not as an intruder, but as a friend to these magical creatures. As the first light of morning touched the cliffs, Kale awoke to find the cubs still near him. They had stayed through the night, showing no fear. Kale laughed softly, brushing dust from his clothes. "Good morning, my friends," he said. They blinked at him, nuzzling gently as if greeting him back. Kale knew that this was only the beginning. He stood carefully, not wanting to scare them, and promised aloud, "I will come back tomorrow and the next day and every day after. We will be friends, I swear." The cubs made soft chirping sounds, their tails flicking as if understanding his promise. Kale turned to leave, but he looked back one more time. The hollow felt brighter, warmer, and full of possibility. The bond he had begun to form with the cubs would grow stronger with each passing day, and together, they would change the wasteland forever. Kale returned to the wasteland the next day, carrying a small bundle of food and a few handmade toys. His steps were careful, slow and gentle. He did not want to frighten the dragon cubs, but he was excited to see them again. The sun was high, casting long shadows over the jagged cliffs. The wind carried the scent of dry earth and distant moss, and Kale felt a thrill as he approached the hollow where the cubs lived. The nest was there just as he remembered, tucked safely among the rocks. The cubs were awake, their tiny eyes glowing faintly in the sunlight. The green cub, the smallest and bravest, watched him carefully. The bronze and silver cubs shifted, huddling together but keeping their gaze on him. Kale knelt a little way from the nest, keeping his hands visible and his voice soft. "Hello," he said gently. "It's me, Kale. I brought something for you." He set the bundle down carefully. The cubs sniffed the air, moving closer but still cautious. Kale opened the bundle slowly, revealing some berries and a small cloth ball. "I thought you might like these," he whispered. The cubs tilted their heads, their tails flicking in curiosity. Slowly the green cub stepped forward, sniffing at the food. Kale stayed still, letting the cub explore at its own pace. The cub tasted a berry, then nudged Kale's hand lightly. Kale smiled. "Good," he said softly. "You like it? I have more if you want." The bronze cub crept forward next, sniffing the ball. Kale rolled it gently toward the cub and it pawed at it clumsily, sending it rolling across the rocks. The silver cub joined in, and soon all three cubs were playing together with the little toy. Kale laughed, the sound carrying over the cliffs. The cubs chirped and squeaked, clearly enjoying themselves. Kale spent the morning teaching them simple games. He made small trails of berries, encouraging the cubs to follow them, and watched as they chased one another in the sunlight. He noticed their different personalities. The green cub was brave and curious, always the first to explore. The bronze cub was cautious, staying close to the nest but learning from Kale's calm presence. The silver cub was playful, rolling on its back and chasing shadows. Kale learned their little habits and started giving them names in his own mind, even if the cubs didn't understand the words. By afternoon, Kale decided to rest nearby. He sat on a flat rock, letting the cubs approach him at their own pace. The green cub curled up beside him, brushing its warm, smooth scales against his arm. The bronze cub leaned its head on his leg, and the silver cub rolled against his feet. Kale smiled, feeling a sense of warmth and connection he had never felt before. This was more than curiosity or play, it was the beginning of a real bond. As the sky grew darker, clouds forming in the distance, Kale realized that a storm might be coming. The wasteland could be dangerous in bad weather, but he did not want to leave the cubs alone. He stayed close, speaking softly to them about the stars and distant lands. The cubs listened, their eyes half closed, and even the normally cautious bronze cub seemed calmer than usual. Kale felt proud. For the first time, the cubs had fully trusted a human to be near them without fear. Night fell, and the hollow became quiet except for the sound of the wind and the gentle breathing of the cubs. Kale lay down carefully, letting them settle near him. The green cub rested its head on his chest, the bronze cub leaned beside him, and the silver cub curled around his arm. Kale felt their warmth and softness and smiled in the dark. This night was different from the last. They had not only tolerated him, they had accepted him as part of their small, hidden world. The storm came slowly, bringing gusts of wind that rattled the rocks and shook loose dust from the cliffs. Kale stayed calm, speaking gently to the cubs. "It's okay," he whispered. "I'm here. You're safe." The cubs pressed closer, following his calm lead. They had never done this before. Usually storms made them scatter or hide. But now they trusted him enough to stay close, letting his presence protect them. Kale realized then that this was true trust, earned through patience, care, and gentle words. By morning the storm had passed. The sky was clear and bright, and sunlight bathed the hollow in golden light. Kale awoke to find the cubs still near him, their eyes shining with curiosity and affection. He smiled softly. "Good morning," he said. The cubs chirped back, nudging him gently with their small noses. Kale knew this was a turning point. They had not only accepted him, they had chosen him as a friend. Kale stood carefully, brushing himself off. "I will come back tomorrow," he said. "And every day after. We'll spend more time together and you'll learn that not all humans are dangerous." The cubs flicked their tails and chirped in response as if promising they would wait. Kale waved one last time and began to walk back toward the village, feeling a sense of joy and purpose. He had earned their trust and in return he had found friendship, wonder, and a bond that would grow stronger with every visit. That day Kale realized something important. Trust was not given, it was earned slowly and gently with kindness and patience. The dragon cubs had taught him this lesson, and he had taught them that humans could be friends, not just intruders. Together, they had taken the first steps toward a connection that could change the wasteland forever. Kale walked toward the wasteland with a light step, carrying his small bag filled with berries, water, and a few handmade toys. The sun shone brightly and the wind whispered through the cliffs, carrying the familiar scent of dry earth and distant moss. Today felt different. Kale knew that the dragon cubs were waiting, and he was eager to see them again. Each visit had made their bond stronger, and he could feel their trust growing slowly day by day. When Kale reached the hollow, the cubs were already awake, stretching their small bodies and blinking their glowing eyes. The green cub, bold and curious, stepped forward first, watching him carefully. The bronze cub remained near the nest, cautious but attentive, while the silver cub rolled playfully, flicking its tail in excitement. Kale smiled. "Hello, friends," he said softly, keeping his voice gentle. "I brought some food and toys. I thought we could play today." He placed the bag carefully on the ground and opened it to reveal the berries and the small cloth ball. The green cub sniffed at the food first, then cautiously tasted a berry. Kale held still, letting the cub approach him at its own pace. The bronze cub moved closer next, examining the ball, and soon the silver cub joined. Together they began pawing at the ball, rolling it, chasing it, and leaping after it in clumsy delight. Kale laughed, a warm sound that echoed across the cliffs. The cubs chirped and squeaked in response, their small voices full of joy. After playing, Kale rested on a flat rock, letting the cubs settle around him. The green cub curled beside his arm, the bronze cub leaned against his leg, and the silver cub pressed close to his side. Kale gently stroked their scales, marveling at how smooth and warm they felt. He realized that these creatures, once feared by everyone in his village, had chosen to trust him. He felt a deep connection with them, a bond stronger than anything he had experienced before. As the afternoon passed, Kale spoke softly to the cubs about the village, the people, and the sunlit fields. He told them stories of the world beyond the cliffs, imagining distant mountains, rivers, and forests. The cubs listened quietly, their eyes following his every movement. Kale noticed that they began to respond to his voice and gestures, chirping and nudging him, even mimicking some of his actions. They were learning from him just as he was learning from them. When night began to fall, clouds appeared in the sky, hinting at another storm. Kale knew the wasteland could be dangerous after dark, but he did not want to leave the cubs alone. He stayed with them, speaking in low, calm tones. The cubs huddled closer, seeking warmth and reassurance from his presence. Kale realized that this was a test, not of strength but of trust. The cubs were choosing to rely on him for protection, just as he had learned to rely on their quiet, gentle instincts. The storm came quietly, with gusts of wind and small rumbles of distant thunder. Kale stayed calm, holding the cubs close. He whispered stories of the stars and faraway lands, imagining the moon shining over their rocky home. The cubs pressed closer to him, their small bodies trembling slightly in the cold wind, but they did not run or hide. They had learned that Kale's presence was safe. He had earned their trust, and now they depended on it. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the wasteland bathed in golden sunlight. Kale awoke to find the cubs still beside him, their eyes bright and alert. The green cub rubbed its head against his chest, the bronze cub rested its head on his knee, and the silver cub curled around his arm. Kale smiled warmly. "Good morning," he said softly. The cubs responded with gentle chirps, nuzzles, and small playful movements. Kale knew that something extraordinary had happened. These dragon cubs, once untouchable and feared, had accepted a human as part of their world. Kale spent the day teaching the cubs new games and exploring the cliffs together. They followed him carefully, mimicking his movements and responding to his gentle voice. Villagers who came to the edge of the wasteland watched in awe. They had always feared the dragons, believing them to be untamable. Now they saw a human boy moving among the cubs, playing, speaking, and laughing. They began to understand that trust and kindness could bridge the gap between species. By evening, Kale and the cubs returned to the hollow, resting together as they watched the sunset. The cubs had grown comfortable enough to play, explore, and even rest beside him without fear. Kale felt a profound sense of joy and purpose. He had not only gained their trust, but he had also shown that humans could be gentle, patient, and worthy of friendship. The bond between them was stronger than he had imagined, built on patience, kindness, and courage. Over the following weeks, Kale visited the wasteland every day. He brought food, toys, and stories, and the cubs grew more playful, affectionate, and confident. They learned to trust not only Kale but also the presence of humans in their world. Kale realized that the dragon cubs were more than creatures of fear, they were beings capable of friendship, loyalty, and love. Together, they transformed the wasteland into a place of wonder, safety, and connection. One day, as Kale prepared to leave for the village, he looked back at the hollow. The cubs were there, tails flicking, eyes glowing, and bodies poised to follow him. Kale smiled, knowing that they had become inseparable. He spoke softly, "I will come back. We will always be friends." The cubs chirped in reply, their small voices full of life and trust. Kale walked away with a light heart, knowing that together, they had begun a new beginning, a bond that would last forever. In that wasteland, a human boy and dragon cubs had bridged the divide between their worlds. Trust had been earned, friendship had been formed, and hearts had been changed. The cubs, once feared by all, had found a companion who understood them, and Kale, once a curious boy, had found friends who taught him that courage, patience, and kindness could create miracles.